Hi, so today for our crisis intervention panel, we're going to kind of talk about child abuse and the different types of abuse in general, and then also just the different services that are offered to help those in need for that, and then also how it affects those children whenever they get older and stuff like that. So, my name's LeeAnne.
I'm Morgan. I'm Brandi.
Tiffany.
So, we're going to kind of start off with the different types of abuse.
The first type of abuse is emotional, so that is anything that can cause psychological trauma. It diminishes the person's sense of identity and their self worth. That can be degrading to them, yelling at them, just kind of making them feel like they're not important when they are being talked to.
Kind of almost like degrading the kids so that they just don't feel confident in themselves. They don't usually have as high self-esteem and different things like that too.
And then there's physical abuse, which is kind of the one that's more commonly known. That's just any harm done to somebody by someone else, pushing, hitting, biting, shoving. It's intentional. It's not, accidental, which sometimes I think people try and make it seem accidental. There is the third one is sexual abuse, which is any undesired or unwanted touching, forced, demanded sex, anything like that from one person to another.
And then so that kind of gets us into the different signs of each of the abuses. So that could be like if a child is like maybe walking, like they've been, hit or something. So it could be how they're walking. It could also be sore throat. That could be a sign of like a sexual abuse. Different ones could be.
I would say physical abuse. Usually, if you see bruising on like different parts of the body that most
normally
people won't see,
bruise.
like upper thighs if they're swimming, and like around the neck and like behind the ears, different things like that too.
And another sign of like sexual abuse, especially if a parent doesn't know about it, is maybe some suspicious stains in the child's underwear when like the parent is doing laundry. If there's some bleeding or something like that caused by sexual abuse. Maybe the parent has a feeling there's not something that's like not right, or the child and whoever's abusing seems real secretive, or another one could be that they're maybe kind of finding notes around the house or in like a diary or something like that that is seeming a little bit suspicious and stuff like that.
There was also a study done in Canada about like they reached out to adults that were sexually abused as a child and like how they are responding to it now. The males reported difficulty disclosing because they feared that they were going to be viewed as homosexual and as victims. Women's their difficulty centered on feelings which conflicted about responsibility, and they were more strongly anticipated by being blamed or not believed.
And so, kind of, the next thing that we go into is kind of the culture background of abuse. And after a lot of research and stuff, we found that a lot of cultures just don't, they're not okay with abuse. So there was even a thing too, because here in the U.S., like emotional abuse, physical abuse, you can go to jail for. Sexual abuse, but you don't ever really hear a lot of like someone getting charged for emotional abuse, because like we were talking earlier,
and emotional abuse is hard to prove.
It's hard to prove, exactly. But there were other countries that like for emotional abuse, I guess even if it's just even said of, that person can go to jail. Like if someone, like here, if someone said they were raped, that person would kind of get put on trial or stuff like that. But so most cultures are not okay with the abuse in general, even like emotional abuse, which we kind of thought was interesting too. So,
and then like going off of that, like other cultural things that we notice as ourselves is that like most people don't usually get, I guess, as much attention of saying, oh, you're an abuser, let's get you into treatment. Most of the time it's like, oh, you're an abuser, you're going to go to jail, you're not going to associate with anyone because you did this terrible crime. It's like almost like a hidden type of thing that they're going about, that they just don't want it to be known, and so they just don't give them the appropriate treatment to help them actually go through and be able to change that lifestyle or that bad negative behavior that they have. Because most of the time also is that abuse occurs because they were previously abused, and like that's the only thing they know. So maybe like teaching them new techniques to help them be able to come through with their abuse would be helpful, but yet it's like a undesired thing in our culture to be able to help those people, but will be helpful and like helping with like addictions or other things that are also undesirable. But
And just kind of going off that too, we were talking about how it's not okay in all cultures. Another thing that kind of goes with that is how it is abusers in prison are. Like, murderers and stuff like that, they kind of have like a good rep in prison, but child abusers, child molesters are that one population in prisons that nobody likes. Like
Right.
guards typically turn their heads from when they're being abused and stuff like that, because no one has any like, I don't want to say pity, but they don't really care to.
They don't want to put up with it.
They don't want to put up with it. They don't like knowing that they abused a child, so it's not okay. Even for prisoners, they think it's not okay to abuse a child. So that
Right.
says something about this kind of crisis problem.
right.
Do you have anything else on cultural bullies?
No, we can.
No, I think I mean just overall, it's just
From what we
most
found.
people are like it's just not okay. So
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting that everyone has like a universal thought about it.
And then there was some stuff
Okay.
about the disclosure too, about how a child would disclose abuse to family, friend, relative, teacher. The way it's disclosed, it's not typically disclosed like full out. It's normally like hints, like a kid saying, I don't like that babysitter, I don't like that teacher, I don't like being home.
Or another thing I saw too was I can't sleep at night, or
Yeah.
I think we kind of
Yeah.
talked about that too. Just little things that maybe you wouldn't even think of.
Mhm.
That, oh my goodness, my child was sexually abused or whatever, or any
Yeah.
abuse. But, I guess unless you really like think about it, why would they not like this babysitter?
Yeah.
And why would they? Because if someone says they don't like a babysitter, it's probably normally because, they got on to me, or, like I got in trouble for doing something and stuff. So
Yeah.
I don't think anyone goes to think, maybe they were abused or something like that.
And disclosure can also be affected by race, gender, age, how it's taken when someone does disclose. The way the person they disclose to reacts can affect their long-term recovery and, the possibility of them recanting the abuse, especially if it's someone close to them. I did find something when we were researching that said a relationship between a mother and child has a better outcome of disclosure just because they have that special bond. There's less of a chance of the child going back on what they're saying, as opposed to if they were to disclose to like a teacher or a friend or
Right.
something like that.
So then, which kind of takes us to the access to crisis services. So one thing we kind of talked about too and found research on was what were kind of like the barriers for people who could find like access to services. Like what kind of stood in the way. And I think we kind of saw like the socioeconomic. I think I said that right. The status.
Yeah.
So like if people because on certain things, like if you need counseling or however it is, some people might not be able to get that just because of insurance, whether or not they're able to afford the things, because not all services are free. So that was one thing that we had found, and also stuff like that. But also too, location is a huge thing. I mean, I live out in the country, and so honestly, if it was anyone that happened there wouldn't be access if Evansville wasn't close to where we come here for.
Right.
Access
And then
to
like
that.
in my area, I'm from like a rural area too, but we don't even have anything that's close to us. Like
Right.
Evansville's close to you, but like around me, it's at least 40 to
It's a
45
distance
minutes
to
to even
drive.
get to somewhere
Yeah.
that might have some, but it's not even to the extent of what Evansville offers.
Mm-hmm.
Because the closest place is probably Jasper, and even then they don't have the extent of services to people who have this kind of like thing, or
Right.
I mean just mental health help in general
Mhm.
either.
Which kind of leads in, if you guys are talking about, if you can hear something too, but also what leads into it is knowledge of services. Some
Yeah.
people just don't honestly know about services. Like this really doesn't have a whole lot, but in my town, like no one ever knew about food banks.
Yeah.
And like there was one that I knew about just because I was an office worker, so I like had told a family about it one time. And then come to find out there's a whole bunch more. So there's other services
Yeah.
that there might be offered, but
So-
people just don't know it.
Yeah.
I'm one person that didn't know, so how many other people don't know about
I know
the
one-
different services
Right.
offered to help
Yeah.
with whatever
One
situation?
service that you can use, or that children of abuse can use, is like school social workers and stuff like that.
Which would be the
I'm-
available, the ones that are
I'm
available.
from this area. All of the high schools and the middle schools and everything in this area have a social worker. I didn't even know until after I graduated high school that my high school had a social worker, because it wasn't widely promoted that we had counselors, but the
Yeah.
counselors more did your class schedules and stuff like that.
Right.
They
Yeah.
weren't really. I mean, they were a counselor in that aspect, but we didn't know we had. I didn't know we had a social worker.
Right,
And
Which
which
leads
I
us-
think that has grown to, like, it's more noticeable, which I know
Mhm.
for a fact that our schools were so small and we didn't have the funding to even have a social worker back then, but they just now got a social worker like 2 years ago. Like, just now in my area do we even have one, and they have to cover the whole county and not just, like, one school.
Mhm.
Whenever I think, like, at least Evansville, I think, has one, like, in
At
every
least
school
one
or
to every
one.
2 schools.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
is kind of the average for the schools in the
So
social
I
workers
thought
here.
I think that's good that we're at least making
There's-
improvements
it's
on it, because
expanding,
with-
yeah.
I've had experience in my placement at a school, and that's actually where most of the kids would feel comfortable with my
Mhm.
supervisor to tell what was going on at home.
Right.
But that's also because she kind of had a little bit of an idea with them, and they just felt comfortable because they were at school. That was a place that they were safe.
Right. So, like, definitely social worker, or, school social workers at least would be, the available support services, just because that's included in, the school's, like, I guess, funding and stuff, as far as, like, when parents pay, what is that called? Parents pay, like, the monthly or the yearly bill or whatever for,
Oh, yeah.
what is that called? I can't think of what it's
It's
called.
not like tuition, but
it's not
similar
tuition,
to
but
that.
yeah. So that's included for them.
Yeah.
So like that, whereas, if they wanted to see a social worker, if they didn't have a school social worker, they'd have to go to a counselor somewhere, and then that would cost. So that would be something that's free, but then also kind of, we talked about like outside sources, like for abuse in general, like there's the YWCA, Youth First, the
Which is
Willow
the social
Tree,
workers.
Posey County.
Yeah.
And those are the only ones that we can honestly think of off the top of our head. But there's
Especially in
so
this area,
much
too.
more, like the Albion Fellows Bacon Center.
That's more for sexual abuse.
Yeah, I mean, there's
Yeah.
stuff for everything. So like,
Domestic violence.
there's
Yeah.
homeless shelters or places you can go to for that. So there's a lot of support services that are available that don't technically cost.
Mhm.
So, which kind of leads us into the importance and availability of these help systems. So one thing is too, when we talk about child abuse or abuse in general, like what are the supports or the systems that come for each of those. So the first thing would be Department of Child Services. That's what we were kind of talking about too. If DCS doesn't do anything, then ultimately it's kind of hard for. We always want to keep watch on the kids, but also too, if they, kind of say that a case is okay, then it's kind of hard for us to continue something just
if a
because
case of
Yeah.
the
child
final
abuse
say
is
goes to them. We've reported.
If we report it and they have to substantiate it or unsubstantiated, if there's no evidence of abuse, then there's nothing that can be done. But then again, there is also a paper trail that has been started. So if you report that a child's been abused, they don't find anything, but there's still a paper trail of a report. So when that does, if something does happen in the future, then there's a history of, there was a suspected abuse case here. So it's a little bit easier to prove if there is abuse in the future.
Mhm.
And then also another one is, clinical treatment of physical and psychological injuries, which, with me working at Crosspoint too, we always have psychological treatment just because everyone has to have so many family sessions, and they meet with the social workers to kind of talk about what the issues were at home. And that's just like with abuse, you talk about, what the issue was at home, maybe, was it a family member? Was it, just the parents letting, their random friends at the house, and maybe that happened. And also too, that goes to the next one, which was family counseling. So, like we just said too, so that's definitely something, whereas if the parents are kind of talking about what, maybe they could have done differently, or, just in general, everyone's kind of given their, 2 cents about it to kind of.
Which, like, kind of going off of that, one thing that I ended up finding in an article that I found was saying, like, different techniques you could do at home. So even if, like, people didn't actually have, like, the resources to go and, like, drive 40 miles or wherever it is to even get somewhere, that they mentioned, like, different things, like, just, like, comforting a child whenever they have any form of abuse. Like, if they happen to get taken away from family or whatever it is, and they're with whatever guardian that they have, they mentioned just like holding them, rocking them, different things like that would soothe them, and even different things like giving them a routine. So then they just get more into like a discipline, and then it just helps them be able to like overcome different things like that, I guess. But I just thought that was really interesting because I never would think, person has been through abuse, and then a routine's really going to help them be able to overcome it. But like evidence has actually shown that giving them a routine
Right.
and different rituals and things for them to do actually helps them be able to cope better with it in the future.
Yeah, and I mean, me being a daycare worker, I've learned over the past just believing them. When they tell you something has happened, believing that that's actually happened. Because if they come to you and say that, you know, so-and-so touched me, and you say, oh, no, they didn't, well, then when they come to you in the future, if something worse were to happen,
or if something does happen, they're not going to come to you.
They're not going to want to come to you because they don't think anyone's going to believe them.
And that's what we got from last week's, even though Brandi, you weren't there, but last week the lady had said, like, always treat whatever they tell you. It was something along the lines of, you know, always believe what they tell you. Like, even if it isn't true, at least we've done our part to report it. You know, as a social worker, we've done our part to at least, you know, trying to make sure that the child was safe and stuff like that. So each of these treatments, they're not, like, you know, the Department of Child Services, family counseling, all that stuff, they're not only used to kind of not help smooth over, but to, like, remedy whatever harm was done from these you know, actions or stuff like that, but also to prevent, you know, more occurrences of happening and stuff. So, I mean, whoever said that, you know, having family sessions was bad, you know what I mean? It can never be bad. It can always help. So, which kind of leads us to conclusion, wrapping it all up. I mean, and I don't think, obviously, no one ever wants to be abused, but it's going to happen, you know, I mean.
It's just a part of
society. So it's just the fact of how to, as social workers, how to, you know, treat those clients. And, you know, with family, there's going to be times when we have, like, family, and, you know, maybe it was the family member that had, you know, had done the, you know, had done the sexual act, or, you know,
or the abusing
in general. So,
and another thing that we two really didn't even get into is, like, the pattern of abuse. So if your parent abused you, then
the cycle of abuse.
The cycle of abuse. That's what I was trying to say. The cycle of abuse, that, you know, can kind of continue. So I think that kind of goes in with disclosure also, and the long-term healing. If a child has more trouble disclosing and more, and it takes longer for them to kind of get treatment for that abuse, that could kind of contribute to continuing that cycle of abuse.
And also too, we didn't really cover this, but what happens when kids, you know, do get abused, and whether it's emotionally, physically, sexually, you know, there comes depression, there comes anxiety. What are some other ones?
I was going to say, well,
just trauma in general, which leads to, you know,
could
lead to any, like, psychological issues, you know,
stomach aches, they end up with
mental health. That's what I was going to say. Mental health, stomach aches. There's always, you know, could be something that could happen, you know, that will be with the long term. Is a result too? Yes.
Yeah. Well, and even then, just from, I mean, field placement again, because I was in an elementary school, like, kids wouldn't be able to control their emotions, just because most of the time, if they were abused or in a certain situation like that, they weren't allowed to do that. And so when they would get upset, they would just keep going, and they wouldn't be able to know how to stop themselves. They would just be like, oh, well, this is normal. It's fine. I can just go ahead and cry it out, whatever. And then they just never realized, oh, this is not what I'm not supposed to do. Like, they just had to take a while, and we would always have to be like, no, this is whenever you need to, like, tell yourself, like, I'm okay, everything's fine, and that they needed to recognize what they were actually feeling and not just go with it. And then, like, some other things we noticed is if any kind of trauma in general happened, they would just increase, like, stealing people's stuff. They would steal other kids' stuff, and they wouldn't realize it was bad. They'd just be like, oh, I like that, so I picked it up. I just thought it was good. Or the teacher had this cool pen, and I just went and took the pen. And I mean, I knew it was hers, but I didn't see how it was wrong that I stole it. So, like, different little things that you're just thinking, oh, it's just a kid thing. Like, they'll grow out of it.
But there's a reason.
But some of those things are because of things that have happened in the past, or...
And I heard this one time, and I really, before even social work, I would never think anything of it. I would just think, oh, that's a bad kid. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I've heard, too, that, you know, there's a reason for every action they make. Whether it is them acting out and just being, you know, and you've worked in daycare as well as I have. And I've noticed, too, just when I think about it, some of the kids that I've worked with, they have acted out. And I do kind of know their past, but I never put two and two together. So, but also, too, that comes with it, too, is maybe there was a child who did tell someone that they were abused, and maybe nothing resulted out of it. And so then, therefore, they could shut down because nothing happened before, and maybe it has continued to happen, but they think, oh, well, no one did anything about it before, so why Why now? And also, too, another thing that can come out of it is, self-harm. They could easily, want to hurt themselves, and not as well as, suicidal ideation. They could also have like homicidal ideation because they're so furious and upset with the person who did this to them. So it could, there's just an array of outcomes that could happen just because of someone being abused.
Yes. And even with you saying about self-harm, I mean, most of the time we just think self-harm it's just only with teens or it's with older adults, like, mid-20s, so on and so forth. But, like, even children, if they're having that, I mean, they just think, okay, I'm just going to give myself, like, a carpet burn.
Yes.
And they just think that's what they're going to do.
Yes.
And so even if it's not self-harm and what we think with teens, like if they cut or different things like that, I mean, they can still, like, punch themselves in the arm or they can just,
That's
like, rub their arm on it.
Yeah,
and
self-harm, for sure.
Yeah, and it's very noticeable. And then you just think, well, what is it? So.
So basically what we've kind of brought in from like different topics from what we've talked about and even different resources was just that just like in general and like life in general, if something happens, it's going to follow you throughout your whole life.
Yeah.
And so I think there was something you found as far as like there was something a man said.
Well, that's what she mentioned
Was that
earlier.
what you
She
said?
was saying
Okay.
like, even though that they went all through their childhood, their teen years and everything, even as adults, like they still have effects of what that
Right.
happened when they were so young.
Yeah.
Like regardless if they think that they get over it, technically they don't. If like someone brings
It's
it
still
up.
there,
A lot
yeah.
of them still experience trauma from their past experiences.
And
Yeah.
another thing too, we were talking about trauma. It could also, trigger PTSD, and I'm just trying to think of different,
Those
like
are, like,
stuff like
larger
that.
Multiple personality
Multiple
disorder.
personality
I mean,
disorders, like
just like an example, the movie Sybil, that is
Mhm.
triggered because she
she was
was
abused.
by her parent,
Mhm.
her grandmother, and her dad, like very severely. So like that caused her to have
Mhm.
multiple personalities. So there's all
Yeah.
kinds of stuff that can result out of abuse.
Right.
Yeah.
So all in all, that was kind of our panel. I think it opened each of our eyes. I think we could say we definitely learned something about abuse that we probably didn't know before. So I think, I know myself, I have a very sensitive heart when it comes to abuse. I wish I could just take all the pain from the kid. You don't ever want anyone to have to go through that. And I think it's going to be difficult because eventually, we'll all come in contact with someone who's been abused. So as a social worker, we're going to have to, put on our game face and want to help them any way we can. But I think we really learned something out of this, and hopefully to benefit our career and stuff like that. So
Yeah, I think we learned a lot about different techniques and things we can at least use with that too.
and to know that it's not, because sometimes you think, okay, they had a few sessions, they're not wanting to commit suicide. They say they feel better, so they feel better. Well, sometimes you might feel better in the moment, but it's when you go home by yourself, or it's when maybe they drive by the old house where they were that it happened. Like that could easily trigger it. So technically, they might say, okay, we're fine, but really, when you go through something like that, it's not just gonna people live through it up until they're older. So
I think that's
all right,
it.
thank you.
Thanks, guys. Disregard all ending here.
Tiffany
Tiffany's
forgot
trying
her
to turn it
password.